In this video, we're going to talk about the 4 different types of bonds and how you determine what type of bond or what type of compound a specific compound is just based off of its chemical formula. So we're not looking at properties or anything like that. We're just looking at examples where if I give you a chemical formula, you can tell me whether it is an ionic, covalent, or metallic compound. So what types of bonds that compound has. So we're going to start with ionic. Ionic compounds are made up of a metal element and a nonmetal. So all ionic compounds have a metal and a nonmetal. This means that when we look on our periodic table, it's going to have an element from the left side of the periodic table, so anything that's a metal, and then it's going to have an element from this upper right-hand corner. So the upper right-hand corner has our nonmetals, everything else are metals. Okay, and every ionic compound is going to have a metal and a nonmetal. A good example of an ionic compound is table salt, NaCl. So sodium chloride is table salt. It's an ionic compound. So sodium is my metal. If I go find it on the periodic table, it's over here all the way on the left. So sodium's a metal. Chlorine, on the other hand, is all the way over here on the right. That makes it a nonmetal. So anything that has a metal and a nonmetal is going to be an ionic compound. Now, the second type of compounds that we're going to look at are called covalent compounds. Again, we're not looking at properties, we're just looking at chemical formulas. So if you look at a chemical formula, a covalent compound is going to be made up of only nonmetals. Okay, a really good example of a covalent compound is carbon dioxide, which is CO2. So there are 2 elements, there's carbon and there's oxygen. Both carbon and oxygen are found in this upper right-hand corner, so where our nonmetals are. So since both of these are nonmetals, there's no metal, there's no metalloid, it's just nonmetals, that makes it covalent. The third major category of bonds or compounds we're going to look at are metallic. And metallic compounds are going to have only metals. Okay, so you can have multiple metals blended together. So say we have zinc and copper blended together. Since both zinc and copper are metals, that makes this a metallic compound. So metallic compounds have just metals, covalent compounds have just nonmetals, ionic compounds have a metal and a nonmetal, at least one metal and nonmetal. It can have multiple metals, it can have multiple nonmetals, but it has to have at least one metal, at least one nonmetal to be an ionic compound. The last type of compound that we're going to look at is called a polyatomic compound. And it contains what are called polyatomic ions. So a polyatomic compound, or a compound with polyatomic ions, is going to be a blend of a covalent and an ionic compound. So a polyatomic is going to be made of ions. It's still going to have at least one metal, but it's going to have definitely multiple nonmetals. Okay, so it's going to have at least one metal and it's going to have multiple nonmetals. Those multiple nonmetals together are going to bond covalently, but they're overall going to have a charge, which makes them an ion. And so when they join then with a metal, it's going to form a polyatomic compound. So that's kind of our blend of our ionic and our covalent, because the nonmetal parts are going to be bonded covalently, and then that all together as one unit is going to be bonded to a metal. So in review, we have 4 major categories of bonds that we're going to look at. We're going to look at ionic compounds. Ionic compounds are made up of metals and nonmetals. Covalent compounds, which are made up of only nonmetals. Metallic compounds, which are made up of only metals. And then polyatomic compounds, which have several nonmetals bonded together, and then as a group, that is bonded to a metal. For polyatomic, just to clarify those a little bit, there is a list on the back of your periodic table of all of our common polyatomic ions. So if it shows up back here in this big table on the back at the top of your periodic table, those are all of our polyatomic ions. So if you see a compound that contains any of those, it's probably a polyatomic compound.